Hi everyone, welcome back to another vodcast of English with Joseph. It's good to see you all here today. Well, today I would like to begin a new series about English history. Okay, so for the coming days, we're going to be talking a little bit about great scandals in British history, some inventions in British history, and maybe you can learn some new vocabulary while we're doing that, as well as some grammar. So we have a bit of a mix. Okay, we'll be doing some British history, inventions, scandals, and a mixture of vocabulary and other bits and pieces as well. Okay, so that's starting today. Well, the first thing I would like to talk to you about today is an invention called the hovercraft. For those of you who don't know, the hovercraft is, well, how would you describe it? It's kind of like a boat, only it works with air pressure which goes underneath it, which lifts the thing up. So it's like a boat, but rather than it sitting on the water, it floats above the water because it has air that it pushes down. And the beauty of this is that it can travel on the sea and on the land. It has this big cushion on the bottom, and as it pushes out air, it elevates, it rises up. The history of the hovercraft goes back quite some time, but I think perhaps the most interesting part of it was an invention by Christopher Cockerell. I mean, there were hovercrafts before then, but Sir Christopher Cockerell created the idea of a boat with a cushion around it to be elevated and lifted up. Now, Sir Christopher Cockerell's life is very interesting. I know about him because he was involved with radar. He was involved with radar and he helped to create some of the first British radio technologies at Alexandra Palace. So I'm guessing that must have been around the 1920s. Alexandra Palace was where our first television broadcast came from. If you come to the UK now, you can visit Alexandra Palace. It's not in central London, it's a little bit further out, but it's like a big, big castle. It's very famous around London because I think it has some theme park, and it still has the mechanics of television engineering. They still have some machines up there where they broadcast live, because in those days they couldn't record programs. So Alexandra Palace is very famous, and Sir Christopher Cockerell was very involved in the technology which created television and radio, more on the transmission side. Anyway, he was also involved during the war of, I'm not sure exactly what it was that he did, but he was also involved in radio technology during the war. But one of his biggest inventions that we know about is the hovercraft. Now, the hovercraft, despite its lack of popularity, at one point was our main way of transporting people between the UK and France, and also around the UK as well. It's just like a boat, a very large boat, but it has a cushion on the bottom of it. It's very noisy, and there's a lot of splashing of water. So if you travel in the hovercraft, if you stand outside, you'll get soaked. So I think mainly people are inside. Well, the hovercraft made news today, if you look at the BBC News website, because they want to dismantle it. They want to finish using the hovercraft completely. Already they've replaced most of its services with ferries. Hovercrafts no longer go to France, but we do still use them locally to go to our islands. So that gives you an idea about hovercrafts, and they're in the news because they want to stop using them completely, which is a great pity because I remember as a little boy going on the hovercraft. What's worse is they're not going to preserve the hovercraft. They want to chop them up and use them as scrap. Now the hovercraft, it weighs tons. It's much heavier than a normal boat because of the way it works. But I get a little bit sad when I see parts of British history being destroyed in this way. I'm sure also that the hovercraft must have had some use in our military. In fact, I know that our hovercraft had some use in our military. So it would be such a shame if that was suddenly forgotten and these things were broken up for scrap. Now, I do know that our military still have hovercraft, and I also know that there's still a passenger service from the bottom of the UK, in Portsmouth I think, going to the Channel Islands. The Channel Islands are a very small set of islands in the extreme south of the UK, the very bottom of England. It's UK territory, but they have their own issues and their own ways of doing things. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Well, anyway, that's the story of the hovercraft. And maybe one day you can tell me about the hovercraft in your country. I'm sure there is one, because they were very famous all over the world. So, to summarise, the hovercraft was invented by Sir Christopher Cockerell. You know we give important people the title of Sir. Sir Christopher Cockerell invented the hovercraft as we know it today, but there were hovercrafts before then. Hovercrafts have made the news today because they want to dismantle them, to take them apart and use them as scrap. There is a hovercraft museum which exists somewhere in the country, I'm not sure where, and they've started a petition to save the hovercraft. There's still some small hovercrafts go from the bottom of the UK over to the Channel Islands, such as the Isle of Wight, and probably Jersey too. The hovercraft was a very fashionable way to travel, but it was a little bit clumsy and bulky. But it had lots of advantages because the hovercraft could hover not only above the sea, but above land as well. The hovercraft is part of British history, which very soon will disappear.